Today, we're welcoming attorney Nadia Giroudi from Disability Rights California. She's going to be presenting IHSS Basics for us. Good morning, everyone from Disability Rights. We also have Lonnie Pfeiffer here, who's going to give us a little bit of background on disability rights. And also just FYI, the same link that you used today will be good for all four of the other remaining 3 workshops. So you can just hold on to that same Zoom link, and that way you have that for the following 3. Thank you. Go ahead, Nadia.
Oh, let me go ahead and
Oh, sorry, I forgot Lonnie.
That's okay. Welcome, everyone, and thank you so much. My name is Lonnie Pfeiffer. Like Diana said, we're from Disability Rights California. Today, we just wanted to share a little bit about our services, and we do ask that you hold off on your questions. You will have the opportunity to ask those wonderful questions at the very end, who our staff Esme will monitor through the chat. You can place it on the chat. Please keep your questions general. We will pause the recording so you can either unmute, raise your hands through the emoji symbol on the bottom of Zoom, or type it in the chat. So for those who don't know us, we were formerly known as Protection and Advocacy. We are a nonprofit organization that provides legal services to people with disabilities. We work on issues like special education, regional center services, housing, employment, and so forth. Our offices are located in Sacramento, Los Angeles, Bay Area, and San Diego. And then our smaller offices are in Fresno, Ontario, and Modesto. I will now turn it over to another colleague, Raymond Kwong, who will introduce Nadia Giroudi. Thank you so much.
Good afternoon, everyone. So our presenter today, as Lonnie said, is Nadia Giroudi. She is one of our staff attorneys here at Disability Rights California with the Legal Clinic Project within the Advocacy and Community Engagement team. Without further ado, Nadia, please take it away.
Thank you, Raymond, and hi, everyone. Today we'll be talking about the IHSS Basics. As was mentioned, this is the first part of a 4-part training series. So the next few training sessions on Mondays for English and Thursdays for Spanish will be covering other parts related to IHSS. So without further ado, we will get into IHSS Basics. But before we do, I do just want to give a quick disclaimer that the following presentation is meant only for educational and informational purposes regarding IHSS and does not constitute any kind of unique legal advice or counsel. And please do keep in mind that we do try our best to keep these slides updated with the current laws and policies. However, laws are constantly evolving and changing. So if you happen to revisit this PowerPoint in a few months, laws may have changed or be up to date. So just please keep that in mind. All right, so the topics for today, while we cover IHSS Basics, we will be discussing what is IHSS, the eligibility process, what kind of services does IHSS cover, the application process, and the appeals process for IHSS. All right, what is IHSS? IHSS stands for In-Home Supportive Services, and it is a Medi-Cal program for people, including children with disabilities, to remain safely in their homes. This is an alternative to out-of-home placement. IHSS provides basic services to individuals who cannot safely perform the tasks themselves or needs prompting. IHSS is administered by each county under the discretion of the California Department of Social Services, CDSS. And on their website, you'll be able to access each county's policies and directions regarding IHSS. All right, who is eligible for IHSS? So any California resident is eligible for IHSS if they are blind, disabled, which includes children with disabilities, or 65 years of age or older. So basically, as long as you have a disability or if you are considered elderly. So that's one requirement. You have to be SSI or SSP or Medi-Cal eligible. So even if you don't have SSI or medical, you have to have that eligibility requirement. You are living in a home or apartment, which does not include a hospital, nursing home, assisted living, or licensed care facility. And you cannot live safely at home without assistance. So this raises the question of what is a home? So even though a hospital, a nursing home, or assisted living isn't part of that definition, alternative living situations are allowed. So that would include living in an RV or a shelter or emergency extraordinary circumstances. And that link on this slide is the all-county letter on what is considered to be a home as it pertains to IHSS eligibility. And it clarifies or is intended to assist counties in determining if an applicant or recipient meets or will continue to meet the eligibility criteria for IHSS when residing in or moving to an alternative living arrangement. So if you are in a very unique circumstance, not your typical single family home, and you're just a little confused as to whether you're eligible for IHSS based on your living circumstance, that letter may be helpful to guide you in that. All right, so IHSS pays for a plethora of services, and it is divided into categories, and we're going to go through each one of them. But essentially, the service categories are domestic services, related services, personal care services, accompaniment to medical appointments, paramedical services, time-limited services, and protective supervision. All right, so I think a lot of us may know what domestic services are, but a formal definition of domestic services are general household chores to maintain the cleanliness of the home or space. And so we've listed a few examples of what are considered to be domestic services. We think of sweeping the floors, vacuuming, washing and waxing of floor surfaces, washing kitchen counters, cleaning the bathroom, storing food, taking out the garbage, dusting and picking up items, cleaning the stove, the oven, cleaning and defrosting the fridge, cleaning kitchen appliances, bringing in fuel or heating for cooking purposes, or changing bed linens. There are also miscellaneous domestic services. So when there is a specific service that is identified and documented by a county social worker as necessary for the person to remain safely at home, then that may be obtained as a domestic service. So what can also be included in domestic services is, say someone has a wheelchair, that would require wheelchair cleaning. So wheelchair cleaning would be part of domestic services, as well as changing and recharging wheelchair batteries. So this list is not exhaustive, and other things can be added as determined what would be necessary for the person to remain safely at home. All right, so now we're going to go into related services. And the reason why they're called related services is because they're kind of related to domestic services, but they vary slightly. So they are often grouped with domestic services, but they are considered separate and distinct legally. So first we have meal prep and meal cleanup. And meal prep would be defined as planning the menu for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, preparing foods, cooking and serving meals. Cleanup would be considered cleaning up the cooking area and washing, drying, and putting away cookware or utensils, or loading and unloading a dishwasher. So whereas, for domestic services, it would be cleaning kitchen appliances. This is specifically cleanup as it relates to meals after you eat. So meal cleanup, as mentioned, does not include general cleaning of the fridge, the stove, the oven, the countertop, or sink. That would be considered a domestic service. We also have laundry, which, is everything of what you would consider laundry: washing, drying, folding, and putting away clothes. Grocery shopping, and that can pertain not just to the actual purchase of groceries, but making the grocery list, traveling to and from the store, the shopping, the loading, the unloading, and storing food purchased. And then other shopping and errands can include picking up prescriptions, buying clothes, toiletries, reading important documents such as medication instructions, food labels, utility bills, or rental agreements. And again, this is not exhaustive, but these are the general umbrellas of related services. So next, we're going to go on to personal care services or non-medical care services. And so we have feeding, which can be assisting someone with eating meals, which can include cleaning his or her face and hands before and after meals. We have bathing, grooming, and oral hygiene, which can consist of showering, combing, brushing one's hair, shaving, brushing teeth, etc. However, that would not be considered with routine bed bath. Routine bed bath is when you give someone who is confined to a bed a routine sponge bath. That would be considered separate to bathing. We have bowel and bladder care, which would be assisting the IHSS recipient with using the toilet, so getting on and off, using a bedpan, a commode, a urinal, emptying and cleaning an ostomy bag, an enema or a catheter, applying a diaper, wiping and cleaning a person, and washing and drying the recipient's hands. Dressing would be simply assisting the recipient to put on and take off clothes as necessary throughout the day. So it's not just a one-time thing. If someone needs to change their clothes a few times, for various reasons, that would be considered. Transfer would be getting in and out of bed, on and off seats. So a bed, a chair, couch, wheelchair, or other assistive device, but it would not be assistance on and off the toilet. That would be bowel and bladder care. And also changing the position of a person to promote circulation and to prevent skin breaking down. That would be part of repositioning and rubbing skin. We also have oral hygiene, ambulation, which is, in getting in and out of vehicles, helping with walking. And that can also be helping the person get around the home, to and from the bathroom, from the home to the car, into and out of the car for medical appointments or alternative resources. We have help with prosthetics, so taking off or putting on or cleaning a prosthetic device, such as a hearing aid, a leg brace, or an artificial limb. And we have help with medications, which could be something as simple as reminding the recipient to take prescribed or over-the-counter medications, or organizing one's medication. And of course, other personal care services were, as mentioned, rubbing skin and repositioning, menstrual care, and respiration assistance. All right, so now we have time-limited services, and I know we've gone through a lot, and I do want to say that everyone will be receiving the PowerPoint, and also you have the links here where you can look them up if you do want more information on each service. So time-limited services are a little unique. This means that they are not continuously provided throughout the year. So heavy cleaning here, it refers to the thorough cleaning of the home to remove hazardous debris or dirt. It is authorized one time only and only under certain circumstances. So examples of when heavy cleaning would be authorized is when you are first granted IHSS, when you stop receiving IHSS or are ineligible for a year and then start receiving IHSS again, when living conditions result in a threat to one's safety, or where a person is at risk of eviction for failure to prepare home for fumigation purposes. Another example of time-limited services is removing yard hazards. This is known as yard hazard abatement. So this can include light work in the yard to remove high grass, weeds, and trash when those materials pose a fire hazard, and that is authorized one time only. It can also include shoveling ice or snow, and from entrances and essential walkways when those materials make access to the home hazardous. And then teaching and demonstration. So teaching and demonstrating those services provided by IHSS providers is helpful so that the recipient can perform services which are currently performed by IHSS providers by himself or herself. So not all services are eligible. It is limited to housework, meal prep, meal cleanup, laundry, bathing, feeding, dressing, and yard work. And there is a 3-month maximum for the teaching and demonstration part for the time limited service. So all of the categories are one-time only, except for teaching and demonstration. It has a 3-month maximum to teach the recipient to perform those services themselves, and it is only limited to the 5 categories listed on the slide. All right, so we went over most of the services that IHSS are provided, but we do have protective supervision and paramedical services. So let's go over protective supervision first. What is it? So it is a service within IHSS that allows a person to be supervised and safeguarded from injury, hazards, or harm, essentially 24 hours a day due to dangers posed by the person's behavior. So a person is entitled to protective supervision.
Disculpe la interrupción, pero no encuentro la opción de interpretación español.
Sorry,
Let me pause that for one
Yes.
moment. Sorry. Gosh, why don't I see my button?
Muy amable, gracias.
all right, that was a good water break. Okay, so what needs to be demonstrated for someone to receive protective supervision? So a person is entitled to protective supervision if the following is demonstrated. The person has a mental impairment or mental illness. The person is non-self-directing due to the mental impairment or disability. And what non-self-directing means here is that there is an inability to assess or appreciate dangers or risks of harm caused by certain behaviors. So there's no awareness of dangers that can result from one's behavior. And generally, the way whether one is self-directing is evaluated is by considering 3 categories: memory, orientation, and judgment. Memory is determined by recalling learned behaviors and information from the distant past as well as the recent past. Orientation is an awareness of time, place, self, and other people in one's environment. And judgment is making decisions as to not put oneself in danger. So kind of that stranger danger awareness. So yes, the person has to have a mental illness. They have to be non-self-directing, and the person requires 24-hour supervision to safeguard against self-injury, hazard, or accident. And what this means is that the behavior creates a risk of harm that are frequent and unpredictable, which requires constant supervision. So for example, let's say a child only touches the hot stove when a parent is cooking, only when the parent is cooking. That is considered to be predictable behavior. So protective supervision likely wouldn't be granted there. However, let's say a child knows how to turn on the stove. So the child frequently and at random points of the day turns on the stove in order to touch it when it's hot. That would then require 24-hour supervision. So we're really looking for the unpredictability element. And finally, protective supervision is only for children who are under 18 years of age. The minor must need more supervision than a child of the same age without a mental impairment or disability. So that's a good standard to work by. So a good question to ask is, does it take more time and or intensity to care for a minor in comparison with a minor of the same age without a mental disability? So here it's important to consider the nature, frequency, and duration of interventions required. So we'll give an example here. Let's say a parent may let a neurotypical child play in a different room for an extended period of time, but a parent of a non-self-directing neurotypical child cannot do this since that child may harm themselves. That is where protective supervision could be granted, and that's a good comparison to look at. All right, so what are the types of behaviors that warrant a need for protective supervision? Again, this is not exhaustive, but some common examples are when a child would wander from home and gets lost, eating non-food items, wandering into the street without checking for cars, attempting tasks beyond their physical or mental capability and not understanding the risk of injury. And that can include trying to move furniture or heavy objects, climbing onto counters, climbing tall furniture and jumping off, turning on the stove and forgetting to turn it off, or touching the stove when it's hot, self-biting or scratching, a lack of stranger danger awareness. And it's important here that what we're looking for is an unpredictable pattern, not just one-time circumstances, but it happens frequently and, almost at moments you can't expect. So we have the SOC 821 form here. This is an assessment of need for protective supervision. You can find it on that link on the Department of Social Services website. It must be filled out by an attending physician or medical professional, and they will check the appropriate boxes regarding deficits in memory, orientation, and judgment of your child. All right, so when is protective supervision not available? Protective supervision is not available for friendly visiting or social activities when the need is caused by a medical condition and the form of supervision required is medical. And we'll get to paramedical services in just a bit, but protective supervision wouldn't apply in an example where a recipient has diabetes and needs supervision in case they become hypoglycemic. In anticipation of a medical emergency, protective supervision will not be available. So if a recipient has congestive heart failure and the need for supervision is in anticipation of a heart attack, or to prevent or control antisocial or aggressive behavior, so getting into fights or destroying property, or to guard against deliberate self-destructive behavior, such as when an individual knowingly intends to harm themselves. And again, with protective supervision, the key element is that there's this non-self-directing, not being aware of one's behavior. So if an individual knowingly intends to harm themselves, that kind of negates the need for protective supervision. All right, so now we are going to pivot onto paramedical services. And paramedical services are a category also of services under the IHSS program. They are prescribed by a doctor for a person's health and require some training and judgment to perform. So paramedical services are ordered by a licensed healthcare professional who is lawfully authorized to do so, which persons could provide for themselves, but for their functional limitations. And we have a Disability Rights California publication on this slide at that link if you do want to learn more about paramedical services, but we will of course go into it some more. On the next slide, lists the requirements needed to receive paramedical services. So the person cannot perform the service at all. The activity is necessary to maintain the person's health, and the service requires training and judgment to perform, such as puncturing skin or inserting a medical device into a body orifice. Okay, great. So paramedical services will not be provided unless they are ordered by a licensed healthcare professional using the SOC 321 form. Paramedical services must be provided at the licensed healthcare's direction and must be determined, the licensed healthcare professional must determine the time needed to perform the service. And just, just to clarify, licensed healthcare professionals include doctors as well as other professionals whose license permits them to order the paramedical service, such as a registered nurse, physical therapists, and/or occupational therapists. And we're going to get into the examples just now, but to receive paramedical services, a recipient must give informed consent. And what informed consent here means that you must give permission to receive paramedical services ordered by the professional. And the IHSS recipient also has the right to choose which professional who completes the paramedical order. So some examples of the services ordered by a professional and provided under their direction includes administering medicines or giving injections. So an example of a paramedical service would be putting medication into someone's mouth, crushing medications, and placing it in food. And I think we did talk about non-medical help with medications. That would be under personal services, and that would be reminding someone to take medications, organizing medicine, or cutting pills in half. That would not be considered a paramedical service, but the act of putting it into someone's mouth or crushing that medication or placing it into food, anything that kind of needs judgment and training, that would be a paramedical service. So we have injections, range of motion exercises, pressure sore and wound care, catheter insertion, catheter changes, emptying a urinary drainage bag, assisting with emptying bladder, a bowel program, enemas, tube feeding, trach care, and sectioning. And as we discussed, there is the SOC 321 form. That is the form to request for order and consent for paramedical services. It's essentially a 2-page form that you can find on that link. You basically fill in your medical provider's name and information so that it can be addressed to the medical provider, who will then fill out the information, which will include answering, the question as to whether the patient has a medical condition that results in the need for IHSS paramedical services. And it requires the doctor to list the paramedical services needed that are to be provided by IHSS. And when the doctor lists the paramedical service, the doctor should name the type of service, the time required to perform the service each time performed, and the frequency. So the number of times and time period, and how long the service should be provided. So you can access that through that link. And it's also important to remember that you need to make arrangements for your new provider to be trained by your doctor on how to provide any paramedical services you need and the risks involved. If you are not sure about how the services should be done, you should ask your doctor about this. And you should also plan with your provider on what to do if there's an emergency while your provider is performing paramedical services. And it is really, really, really important that your provider not perform any paramedical service until they have received proper training by a professional. All right, so now we are going to pivot from talking about the services and kind of go into some nuances. So IHSS takes into account the needs of a disabled child that may exceed those of a child without disabilities. So an eligible child for IHSS with a disability can receive the following services: personal care services, related services, paramedical services if prescribed by a doctor, protective supervision, and assistance with travel to approved places. And I just want to note that you may notice that domestic services are not included here as to what an eligible child can receive, and we will get into that, but domestic services are generally not provided to minors, so those who are under 18 years of age. And I know, with children, typically they do have chores, but in terms of the California Department of Social Services rationale is that children don't really do domestic services, or are not really expected to, vacuum or wax the floors or anything like that. So that is kind of the reason why domestic services are not placed into the children's eligibility for IHSS services. All right, how are hours calculated? This can be kind of confusing. So we are going to click on that first link and kind of go through the 4 programs under IHSS. But essentially, IHSS establishes maximum monthly hours depending on whether one is considered severely impaired or non-severely impaired. All right, if we can scroll down, great, just to that chart, that would be perfect. All right, so we'll just stay there for a moment. So according to IHSS regulations, whether you are considered to be non-severely impaired or severely impaired is determined by adding hours in certain categories. So we have meal prep, meal cleanup, respiration assistance, bowel, bladder care, feeding, routine bed bath, dressing, menstrual care, ambulation, transferring, bathing, oral hygiene, grooming, rubbing skins, repositioning, help with prosthetics, and paramedical services. So you are considered to be severely impaired if you receive 20 hours or more in those categories each week, and you are considered to be non-severely impaired if you receive 19 or less hours in those categories each week. And there are 4 programs under IHSS. And generally, when you get the notice that you receive IHSS, you will see which program you're into. It should be listed there. But the first program is the Personal Care Services Program, PCSP. And to be eligible for PCSP, you must be receiving full scope Medi-Cal, and your IHSS provider cannot be your spouse or parent. And whether you are non-severely impaired or severely impaired, the maximum hours you can receive is 283 hours per month of IHSS. The next program is IHSS Plus Option, IPO. And to be eligible for IPO, you do not qualify for the Personal Care Services Program because either your IHSS provider is your spouse or parent, you receive advanced pay, or you receive a restaurant meal allowance. And a restaurant meal allowance is given to IHSS recipients who have adequate cooking facilities at home, but their disabilities prevent them from using the facilities. And if you are severely impaired, the maximum amount of hours under this program is 283 hours. And if you are non-severely impaired, the maximum hours is 195 hours per month. And the next, and I do see a question, I'll just quickly address it here. Can a parent be a provider for their child if the child is a minor? And yes, they can. There are a few requirements with regard to IHSS hours, but yes, that is a possibility for a parent to be a provider for their child. And it is very common. So the third option, the third program is the Community First Choice Option, CFCO. And to be eligible for CFCO, you must be eligible for full scope federal financial participation Medi-Cal and meet a nursing facility level of care. And whether if you are non-severely impaired and severely impaired, whichever one, the maximum amount of hours is 283 hours, but only 195 hours of the 283 can be for protective supervision. And if you are on IPO, the second one we discussed, but can also be on the Community First Choice Option, you should consider switching to CFCO. Everyone's situation is quite different, but CFCO does allow for a greater maximum of hours, which you would still need to prove eligibility for, and you may benefit from the spousal impoverishment rules. And then the last program, which is not as common, is the IHSS Residual. To be eligible, you do not receive full scope Medi-Cal or do not receive Medi-Cal with federal financial participation. Generally, IHSS Residual is for lawful permanent residents. So only about 1.4% of individuals receiving IHSS services are under that program. And if you're severely impaired, the maximum amount of hours you can receive is 283, and non-severely impaired, the maximum is 195. But all 195 can be for protective supervision. So we can go back to the PowerPoint. I just wanted to go over those programs because it can be confusing, but it does have, or it can have implications on the amount of hours you receive. And it's just good to be aware. I also want to say that all the information that is on this slide and everything about IHSS is on that publication that we just went through. It is really helpful. It is very informative. It's quite thorough and can answer, I think, most of the questions regarding IHSS. It's really helpful, and I personally go to that publication quite frequently. But all right, let's talk about proration for related and domestic services. So what is proration? When IHSS services can be met in common among anyone in the home, the hourly need for that service should be prorated. So if multiple people benefit from the provision of a related or domestic service, then the time it takes to prepare that service is divided equally among everyone who benefits, including non-IHSS recipients in the household. So for example, if it takes a parent 100 minutes to do weekly laundry for all 5 members of the family, which includes the parent and the single IHSS beneficiary, then the amount of time allotted to the IHSS beneficiary is 20 minutes, because we have 100 minutes divided by 5 members of the family, and that equals 20. And so the service categories that are prorated are typically domestic services and heavy cleaning, and related services. And we will now go over alternative resources, that third bullet point there. Alternative resources are IHSS-like services that one receives through other programs, such as an adult daycare program or school. And after determining the amount of alternative resources you receive, the social worker will deduct that time from your total assessed need. So adult daycare, day programs, daycares, community resource centers, senior centers, respite centers, those are all examples of alternative resources. And generally what happens is, let's say you live in a household with your IHSS provider. The provider cleans up after breakfast and dinner for both of you. But you go to an adult daycare center where you receive assistance cleaning up after lunch. That is where the county social worker would first add up the total amount of time spent cleaning up after breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and then would make an adjustment or proration regarding the cleanup services done during the adult daycare program. And the fourth bullet point there, tools. That is a notice sent out to all counties regarding the IHSS assessment process. It clarifies the Department of Social Services expectations of the county social worker's role and responsibilities in assessing and authorizing IHSS program services. So that's just a good handbook to read if you would like to learn more about the responsibilities of the county social worker. So now we're going to talk about functional index rankings for minor children, as well as hourly task guidelines. And we can actually go on to the next slide for this because it might be helpful just to get a visual. All right, so you can see a lot of categories and some numbers ranging from 1 through 6. What do those numbers mean? So with the functional index rankings, generally there's a ranking from 1 to 6 for children. And rank 1 means independent. The person is able to perform the function without human assistance. And it goes all the way from 1 to 6. 6 is the other extreme. There's an extraordinary need requiring full human assistance. So 1 is fully independent and 6 is complete dependence. And 2, 3, 4, and 5 kind of build up to that. So rank 2 would be you're able to perform a function, but you need verbal assistance, such as reminders. Number 3 is you can perform the function with some human assistance, such as direct physical assistance from an IHSS provider. Number 4 is you can perform a function with only substantial human assistance. Number 5 is you cannot perform the function with or without human assistance. And of course, 6 is the extraordinary need requiring full human assistance. And so we have those rankings and with regards to each category. And with regard to the hourly task guidelines, they advise county social workers to determine functioning using those rankings and then give hours based on the ranking. So typically what IHSS social workers will do will determine how much help you need for each IHSS task. So the IHSS social worker will rank your functioning in each of the following. So meal prep, shopping, bathing, laundry, prosthetics, respiration, all of those that we spoke about before. So a rank of 1 would mean, you know, for example, you're completely independent for oral hygiene. So you would get that 1. And you can perform that task without any help. And so after the social worker does that ranking for each category, they will use the hourly task guidelines to determine how much time can be authorized for each task. And the guidelines are meant to help an IHSS worker determine how much time should be provided. So they are guidelines, it's not necessarily rules. And so they can vary from IHSS recipient to IHSS recipient. And exceptions to the hourly task guidelines are only allowed when necessary to enable a recipient to remain safely in their home. And exceptions only apply to time and do not allow the addition of any tasks not already identified under the service. So they're not going to add, for example, let me try to think of something like extra dusting to make things look nice. They're not going to add that, but they might add 10 minutes to a domestic service, for example. And so this all kind of ties into the functional index ranking for minor children here. As you can see here, a lot of some of these things like laundry, you can see that's all a 1, shopping and errands, that's all a 1. Some of the other parts are also a 1, and those are for domestic services. So all minors generally should be assessed a functional rank of 1 when identified, unless extraordinary need is documented. And the reason being is when a minor is, you know, 3-4 years old, they're generally not expected to do most things. Usually they have their parent or a guardian or, you know, someone older than them taking care of those things. You know, a 3-year-old dressing a 3-year-old, for example, bathing a 3-year-old. So that's why it's considered to be a 1, because IHSS services really wouldn't be granted for that person. Whether that child is considered to have a disability or not, generally that child wouldn't be expected to be doing that kind of stuff. However, as the minor does get older, there are more opportunities to be ranked higher. And by ranked higher, I mean dependents, receiving more IHSS hours, essentially. And that's because as a child does get older, you know, when they're 6 years old or 8 years old, they're expected to dress themselves. They may be expected to bathe themselves, feed themselves. So as you can see here, you see as a child gets older, there are more opportunities for rankings, for greater rankings. So, you know, you could see here for ambulation starting from age 5, that can range from 1 through 5. And that's because there is that expectation, whether that child has a disability or not, to be able to do that function themselves. And if they can do that function themselves, they will be ranked higher and therefore receive likely more IHSS hours. So you can kind of see a correlation between being ranked higher and getting more hours. And that influences the hourly task guidelines and how the social worker will assess that for you. So I hope that makes sense. This can vary from year to year, but this is generally the standard on how to assess IHSS hours for minor children. All right, so we are now going to talk about the application process before speaking about the appeals process. So how do you apply for IHSS? You would simply contact your local IHSS County Welfare Office and apply. If you click on that first link, that lists the county IHSS program websites for each county. And then next we have the application. That link there is the SOC 295, and that's the application. It's about 8 pages, and you basically fill in your information, your personal information, SSI information. If you've had IHSS before, you would fill in your past IHSS information, household information, etc. And the first part includes that information where you would then authorize the release of your healthcare information to a licensed professional. And then the second part would be completed by the healthcare professional, which is a brief questionnaire on whether you qualify for IHSS. So your healthcare professional, your doctor, would answer questions such as, is the individual unable to independently perform one or more activities of daily living? And then we have the healthcare certification form. And that is called the SOC 873. And just a pro tip, the SOC 874 form, which is the healthcare certification requirement, is provided with that form on the third link, and will provide the due date, which is usually 45 days from the day the county social worker requests it. You may ask for an extension. And another pro tip is that if you are planning to apply for IHSS, make sure that you try to make an in-person appointment with your doctor to complete the form. And if you also are applying for protective supervision, you can also bring the SOC 821 form, which is a protective supervision form. All right, so you're going to contact your social worker on that website. You're going to fill out that application. The next step is the social worker home assessment. A county social worker will interview you at your home to determine your eligibility and need for IHSS. This will be based on your ability to safely perform certain tasks for yourself. And from there, the social worker will assess the types of services you need and the number of hours the county will authorize for each of these services. And so there will be a home assessment. And the purpose of the home visit is to find out what you can and cannot do for yourself, what services you need, and the time your provider needs to perform those services. So your job here is to help the county IHSS worker understand all your care and special care needs and what they mean in terms of time. So remember when we spoke about the hourly task guidelines, that's where it's going to come into play here. So it's really important here to be honest and open. Don't minimize your disability problems and care needs, because you may end up not getting the hours you need. So even though you may feel shy or embarrassed, explain things fully so the county worker understands your situation. There's no judgment, of course. Before the county worker arrives, have the IHSS worksheet in part 2 ready with the hours you think you need. So remember, the county will authorize only what you really need and will not allow extra time for comfort services. So comfort services is, as I mentioned, extra dusting to make things look nice. And be prepared to explain your worksheet hours, that self-assessment. Make a list so you will not forget anything, what tasks you need or your provider does, how you determine the time each take. So it's especially important if there are differences between what the county authorized before and what you believe you need now if you applied for IHSS in the past. So you can also explain why the state hourly task guidelines are not appropriate for your care needs and what special factors need to be considered. And just as another pro tip, make a note of time that person comes to the home and when they leave. That's because generally this process should take a couple hours. It shouldn't be a quick, in and out of someone's home. They're really assessing a lot of, your what you need and through every aspect of your life, and that can take a while. So if you note that this person came in at 12 p.m. and left at 12:30, that's probably going to be insufficient. And so if you're going to be appealing, which I will get to, that is a good way to show that, hey, this was not sufficient. I need more hours because XYZ. So yeah, take notes of questions asked, responses, or the conversation. And yeah, what else was there? I just want to make sure I went through everything. Yeah. Yeah, we spoke about that worksheet, that guide. That's important to help you with the initial intake assessment or the annual review. And that guide will also help you represent yourself and others in fair hearings when there is a dispute about the number of IHSS service hours you need. All right, so now we're going to talk about the appeal. So your IHSS social worker must send you an IHSS notice of action each time a decision is made related to your eligibility for IHSS. So an NOA isn't always a bad thing. So once your application has been processed, the social worker will send you an NOA. If your hours have been increased, decreased, or terminated, your social worker will send you an NOA. And if there have been any other changes, you'll receive an NOA. And if you have applied for, have received, or are currently receiving benefits or services from an assistance program, and you receive an NOA that denies or reduces your benefits, or you turned in an application and the county did not act on it, you can ask for a state hearing. And if you are requesting a fair hearing because you feel you are not awarded enough hours of service, you should file your request within 90 days of the effective date listed on your notice of action. However, if your appeal is based on a reduction of IHSS hours or a loss of benefits, you should request a hearing before the NOA's effective date and should request aid paid pending. Aid paid pending will allow you to continue receiving services while the case is being reviewed. So if you do not get an NOA or your NOA takes effect in less than 10 days from the time you get it, you should ask for a hearing and aid paid pending right away. And so IHSS is required to send your NOA 10 days before the change in your services is supposed to happen. And again, if the county does not give you advance notice of the change in benefits, the county must reinstate your IHSS benefits retroactively. And even if you lose your appeal, you will not have to pay for any services you received while your case was being decided, and that could take several months. The first page of your NOA will tell you when the NOA will take effect, and you can request a hearing online, by phone, by mail, or by fax. So 90 days is the important number to appeal if you feel you were not awarded enough hours. Let's say you are an IHSS provider or you're applying to be an IHSS provider and you get denied, you must appeal within 60 days of the day the county tells you that you are not eligible to be an IHSS provider. And you would fill out another form to appeal, an SOC 856 form. And once an appeal is received by the Department of Social Services, a finding regarding the support or denial of an appeal will be completed within 180 days. So 90 days, if it's based on, an hour reduction or reduce of IHSS services. If you want to be an IHSS provider, you have 60 days. And just in general, if you want to know about how you can get more information for your hearing, this is where that in-home assessment will really come into play. Gather information about how the county IHSS worker determined the hours you were authorized. You can make an appointment to go into your IHSS office to review your case file. You can ask your worker for a copy of the latest needs assessment forms, which will include notes about why hours were or were not given. You can also ask for a copy of the most recent SOC 293 form, which includes information on the functional ranking about what you can and cannot do. And if you are challenging a reduction, ask for copies of both your new and your old assessment forms, as well as your new and old SOC 293 forms. You can also ask for a copy of the sheets in your file where notes were made about contacts and visits with you over the last year. You can ask a copy of the county's hourly task guidelines. They can vary from county to county. And you can also ask for copies of any doctor or medical reports in your file and for copies of any paramedical forms. And again, if IHSS reduced your hours, ask your worker for copies of the regulations listed on your reduction notice. So a good rule of thumb with regards to IHSS hours is just to be prepared, and more is really more here when you are gathering all the information, and if you do choose to appeal in the future. All right, so these are just some of the few resources regarding IHSS. The first one is the Disability Rights California publication on IHSS. And as I had mentioned, this is a really, really, really thorough publication. I use it a lot personally. The second one is the DRC intake line. If you do have not even just an IHSS, but really any matter that you would like to discuss, perhaps you don't want to talk about it here, you can call our intake line and you can ask for assistance, and an advocate and or attorney will help. The third link is the IHSS regulations published by the Department of Social Services. And then the fourth one is the Department of Social Services info, resources, and guides regarding IHSS and many other different programs and services. All right, so I believe that is it. That was a lot, so thank you for bearing with me. I guess we can stop the recording now.